Thank you, Brad. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Brad. Yeah, I've known Brad a long time. We met out at Deer Park. My wife and I have been going out to Deer Park about 18 years now. And before then, in college, I'd studied Japanese Zen, and I thought Zen was like a riddle or some puzzle to be figured out. But as we got to know the monastics at Deer Park and spend time with them, we realized it was more of a practice that we just learn by being with them, learn by practicing. And I want to share a little bit tonight about what I've learned on this path of practice in case it might be helpful. I think we all have our own perspective, and I learned so much. Like the monastics each have their own perspective on Thai's teachings, and I learned from each of them, really. Brother Pha Pai shared that this is a practice, and really we should practice 8 hours for every hour of Dharma study we have. We listen with the Dharma talk. Really, we should not get too intellectual about Buddhism, but actually try to practice and live it. And so the first thing I'd like to share is the importance of a daily practice of meditation. It took us about 3 years going to Deer Park before we started sitting every day. And it was Brother Pha Day that convinced us. Does anybody remember Brother Pha Day? He was a Catholic priest that became a Zen Buddhist monk, a Westerner, and a wonderful ambassador to all of us Westerners. But he just said, hey, just sit for 10 minutes a day, you'll see a difference. And then we started doing that. And he said, no, sit for 20 minutes a day, you'll see an even bigger difference. And then he said, form a sangha. That was the second part. And but as far as daily practice goes, I think it's like preparing ourselves for future conditions. It's like a sailing boat does all its maintenance during the good weather so that when a storm hits, it's seaworthy. Or the fire department does all their training and their equipment prep when there's not an emergency. I think this practice is like that. We have to invest in our practice so it'll be there when we need it. And the second thing is practicing in a sangha, and I'm thrilled you guys are all in a sangha. It took me probably 4 years to realize I can't do it on my own. I feel like I bob around in a lifeboat when I'm on my own out in the ocean, but when I'm in a sangha, I'm on a clipper ship just sailing along. We're carrying each other, and it's so much more easy to practice in a group. So let's hear it for the sangha and the ability to carry us. I'd like to talk about the sutra on the full awareness of breathing and how I've been using that. And I think we may all be familiar with it. Thai speaks to it quite often in his talks. And I love the fact that the Buddha gave us this path of practice. He's telling us how to get to that spot beyond suffering, how to transform our suffering. He's not just sending us postcards from paradise, it's, wish you were here kind of thing. He doesn't just tell us nirvana's fantastic, and he tells us how to progress ourselves, how to move along the path. And also the monastics help with that too. Brother Pha Pai and Brother Pha Po taught a great class on stopping and looking deeply. And I think that's a framework to look at the full awareness of breathing. First thing we need to do is stop. I found that's really what breathing does for me. It grounds me just like Buddha leaning against the Bodhi tree. The breath is our bridge from our mind to our body. And what is it that we're stopping? We're stopping our mind from racing, from carrying us to the future with worries, to the past with regrets, or even racing in the present with just preoccupations. We hide in our thoughts, and sometimes I feel, I'm afraid to come back to the present. But that breath brings us back. It's like an anchor. Thai speaks of the breath as an anchor. I like to think of the breath as a ground wire and electrical system. If you ever worked with electrical systems, if you don't have a common ground, if you don't ground everything there's nothing to keep it from just drifting off wherever it wants to go, and things don't function. So our breath is our ground wire, basically. It connects us back to reality. So stopping that racing mind is the first step, coming back to our breath. And we do that not only by being aware of it, but by following it all the way in, following it all the way out, just like we're pulling a silk thread. And we're not trying to change that breath, just following it. And that brings, I feel it right now, it's coming back to myself. And then, of course, in the full awareness of breathing, we get in touch with our body. And we do a little body scan. How's our body doing? And once we are feeling in touch with the body, we look at feelings. And the Buddha says there's positive feelings, negative feelings, neutral feelings. And a good exercise there, I think, that I practice is to see where I might be hurting. Is there a negative feeling? Do I have a soreness? And put my attention toward that soreness in a kind way. Sometimes, though, if I have a severe pain, I have a negative feeling that I'm preoccupied with. And I try to practice putting my attention to another part of my body, something more neutral. And Joanne Rosen taught us this in an exercise, that find a neutral part in your body in a body scan. Say my eyes, say, and just put my attention there. And through a little bit of gratitude, I can turn that neutral feeling into a more positive feeling. All the things my eyes have done for me, for example. And lo and behold, I ease the tension off of the painful area in my body. And I've used that if I'm trying to sleep when I have a sore muscle or something. So just bringing our attention to our feelings, we can actually soothe the negative feeling. We can transform a neutral feeling into a positive feeling. It's amazing what we can do with our attention on our feelings. And then the next layer to go in the breathing meditation, full awareness of breathing, is emotions. And I've come from an engineering background, and for many years I thought I didn't have emotions. I thought I was just an analytical kind of guy. But then I would notice when I was out weeding the backyard, I would be doing something difficult, and I'd start getting real angry, running things through my head of people I've had arguments with or whatever, and there are emotions. They're there. I just wasn't in touch with it. And the monastics taught us to name the emotion, see what it is, figure out what that emotion is. And I started playing with that, and I noticed it's not usually one emotion, it's a mixture of emotions. So it felt kind of like if you go to a restaurant, maybe you got a Middle Eastern food, something you haven't had before, and you get a weird flavor, and you say, okay, what spices are those? And I do that with emotions. I say, I'm feeling, my heart's racing, I'm feeling something. Am I feeling anger? Is it fear? What's going on? Is it shame? What's going on with my emotions? And just by dissecting it, putting my labels on it, kind of gives it a relief. And I don't know if you've heard this before, but anybody know how long an emotion lasts if you don't feed it? If you don't, and I'll talk about feeding it in a second, but if you just have an emotional reaction to something, it only would last 90 seconds. 90 seconds if we didn't keep fueling it with our thoughts. So if I'm in a position where I can, I'll think about, okay, why is this emotion still here? What am I feeding it with? And quite often it can be the second arrow. I think, does everybody know about the second arrow? You guys heard about that? Reliving the event is just like hitting with another arrow. And sometimes it's even more painful because we think about, I should have said that, should have done this. Why did he do that? So that quite often is the source of it. But also I notice that sometimes I can trace it back to the root of some earlier part of my life where I had a similar experience, and this experience is triggering that. This emotion is being fueled by that young childhood emotion, or that slight that happened in grade school, and then I use Ty's practice of 5-year-old child, where I'll go back to that point in my life as an adult and hold my hand and comfort myself, and on a really good day I'll even comfort the person that I had the run-in with, and think about them as a 5-year-old child, whether it be my relative or some school teacher or whatever might have been the trauma. I didn't have any serious traumas, but growing up they do seem serious, and I've learned from that we really can. We can't change the past, the facts of the past, but I can change my understanding of the past. So when Brother Fob Young talks about this, how we can actually change the past, I think he means that by understanding, we can change how we experience the past and heal ourselves with a deeper understanding and a more skillful understanding. You may have known, hanging around with the monks, nobody's dumb. They're just not yet skillful. That's the worst they'll say about themselves or anyone else would be, well, they're not yet skillful about that. But now we have more wisdom at this point in time. We can apply that wisdom and re-examine the circumstances. So that's kind of the practical side of applying the full awareness of breathing. There are, as you get into deeper levels of it, there's understanding of impermanence, there's understanding of no self, no birth, no death. And the hardest part, I think, of the practice is moving those things from an intellectual, yes, I make sense, to a actual feeling it. And I have to say, I'm still working with that, still accepting the reality, for example, of impermanence when it comes to family members. And there is grieving. I mean, no matter how well our acceptance is of these revelations of the practice, we're still going to grieve loss, I believe. I've seen monastics grieve loss. I think it's a natural part of being a human being. But it helps us understand things better. But that too is sitting with those teachings, and they're not even meant to be teachings. I don't think they're just meant to be a guidebook of what you might see on the route. But look for yourself. This is, the Buddha saw impermanence. The Buddha saw no birth, no death, inner being. But he's asking us to look ourselves and see what we see. The last thing I'd like to share is that when I came into this practice and I started learning these tools, I'll call them tools for a moment, I thought, wow, this is great. Mindfulness, what a great tool. And these sutras are tools I can pull out of the toolbox and use. And I went up to Sister D after one Dharma talk, and I said, I read an article about how widespread mindfulness is now. There's so many mindfulness teachings and people out there teaching it. And she said, yes, that's good, but she was worried that people might just view it as a tool. And I said, well, what's wrong with that? It's a great tool. And she said, well, it's a way of being. It's not a tool. And a tool is something you might use and get bored of and set aside. And she's worried people may have that experience. So I didn't quite understand it, but the more I sit with that, the more I realize that mindfulness helped me still my mind and stop my racing mind, and kind of stop that voice in my head. And then I started realizing that the voice in the head is the tool that's a little logical tool that I've employed all this time. And my awareness is really who I am. And I've let the tool, the logical talking mind, sit on the throne all these years, and I need that tool. I need to use that voice, but should not be the king of the kingdom. It's really awareness. It's a way of being. So then suddenly I realized, oh, that's what they're talking about, a way of being. So that's kind of where I am, but if I have to say any given day, I spend very little of it in true awareness still. But that exercise, that mental muscle of coming back to the present, coming back to awareness is the muscle we're trying to develop in this practice. And so that's all I have to share. I will say that it's a path, and I'm certainly not very far along the path, but that's what I've run into, and I'm looking forward to Dharma sharing and hearing other perspectives. So Ron, bowing out.
Thank you, Ron. This is unscripted, but